Welcome to Mission Central Conference. My name is Les Peters. I'm the founder and field director for Impact Ministries in Guatemala. And it's my joy today to lead this seminar entitled How to Do Short-Term Missions with Long-Term Impact. And this really is a seminar about getting the most effect possible from a short-term missions trip. I will also be giving some tips and some pointers to team leaders. And if you've never led a short-term missions trip before, well, this is the place to be. I'm hoping to give you lots of information and get you thinking and make you feel comfortable about the process. As you're watching this seminar, I'm going to invite you to look at the bottom of your screen for the questions for speaker box. And anytime during the presentation that you wish to forward a question to us, please do that. I'll have some people monitoring the questions, and at the end of the seminar, I'll be trying to answer as many of those as I can. I'll also give you some personal email direction so that if we don't get to all the questions, that you can feel free to email me or dialogue later together. Just a little bit about myself. I grew up in small town Saskatchewan, and when I came to know the Lord, I was really excited about sharing the gospel and being effective in the kingdom of God. Went to Bible college and there got some orientation on what was happening in other parts of the world. After graduating from university with an education degree, I went into teaching, and I spent 20 years involved in Christian education and Christian school administration. That is where I had my very first experience leading a short-term missions team, which I will speak about in just a moment. My wife and I then 20 years later, founded Impact Ministries and came to Guatemala as field directors. And we have now been living here for over 20 years, and we have had the joy of getting to know the Guatemalan people and serving in this part of the country. We are serving in the Central Highlands of Guatemala. Our ministry is focused on education, leadership, discipleship, and evangelism in the outlying communities. This is an area where there's a great deal of poverty. There's a history of violence. There's a history of oppression, a lot of poverty, malnourishment among the children, injustice, healthcare systems that don't work, education systems that really are underfunded. All of these problems present great opportunities. And with my background being in education, we have now had the opportunity to open 10 Christian schools with the focus of introducing these children to Christ and then later discipling them. And so we now have 1,600 students in our schools. Many of them come from very poor homes and are malnourished, and so we provide meals for them, and we're providing thousands of meals per week, and also we have a medical clinic here, and we lead short-term missions trips. And over the years, we have either led or hosted over 400 short-term missions trips. And it's out of that background where we've made lots of mistakes, we've done some things right as well, and we've been learning as we go that I want to share in this seminar. Why do a short-term missions trip? Well, for me, it's very personal. A short-term missions trip is what changed my life. I was teaching in a Christian school, and the principal asked me if I would lead a short-term missions trip to Guatemala. This is before the days of Google. This is 28 some years ago. And I wasn't sure exactly where Guatemala was, so I had to go to an atlas, remember what they are? And I had to find out, oh, okay, there it is. I didn't have a very good geography of Central America. I found out Guatemala was 1/92nd the size of Canada in landmass, and with 1/3 the population. And there was a civil war going on in Guatemala at the time. Now, I was green. Inexperienced, never been on a short-term missions trip, much less led one. So if you have never led a short-term missions trip or been on one, this seminar is for you as well. My goal on that short-term missions trip was to get all my students down here and back alive. That was my expectation, and anything else beyond that was a bonus. But you know what? The Lord did so much more. He did so much more in those very few short days. He changed my life. Here I am. My life is a testimony of that change of that first short-term missions trip. It changed my perspective about the world. And this is one of the things you'll commonly hear about short-term missions. It changes people's perspectives. It changed my students' lives. I saw more spiritual growth in those 2 weeks than I did in a whole year of teaching them Bible classes. Now that might tell you something about what kind of teacher I am, all right? But nonetheless, I was so pleased to see what was happening in their hearts and in their lives while they were here. It changed our Christian school. Over the years, I brought a short-term missions team every year, sometimes twice a year, and it changed the barometer in our Christian school. And only the Lord can do that, but He utilized Christian schools. Now, He utilized short-term missions. Now, there's a lot of criticism about short-term missions, and some of it is justified. And it costs a lot. And I'm sure if you are dialoguing with people, somebody will come along and say, wouldn't it be better to take all that money, all those funds that are utilized for airfare, and all the expenses involved in a short-term missions trip, and send the money down? Wouldn't that be better? Now, I realize I'm speaking just kind of in a mid-COVID, post-COVID environment here, and we don't know what the future of short-term missions is, but I will tell you this. The Lord's directive is to go. That's the Lord's directive, to go into all the world. And short-term missions are a great step in beginning that process. So coming back to the question, wouldn't it be better to send the money? And I want to just arm you with some thoughts if somebody asks you that question. This is how I respond. What I say is, it all depends if you're thinking short-term or long-term. And it all depends if you're thinking solely of the ministry in the receiving country or you're thinking of the participants as well. Because if you're thinking short-term, I, as a field director here in Guatemala, short-term, what could happen in the next 6 months if somebody sent us all the money for their airfare, wow, we could do a lot. But the long-term effect is greater if you send us a team. Now, it may not be greater for our ministry, Impact Ministries, but it is greater in the kingdom of God. And I think that our time as believers on this earth is so short, we need to be careful that we invest wisely and we invest in something that provides long-term permanent benefits. Now, people have been asking about the goals of short-term missions and what does it accomplish? Well, I want to tell you what it accomplishes for the people in the destination country. The people in the destination country, when a team of people from abroad come and visit them, it has a huge impact. I remember on one occasion we had a short-term missions team here in Guatemala, and we had arranged to go to visit this family. It was a very needy family. They were going through some very challenging things. They were suffering, and our short-term missions team came and we said, we'd like to do a home visit with this family and come and pray with them, hear their testimony, share some words, some scripture, and pray with them. It may not sound like a lot. It may not sound significant. But when the whole thing was over, the man of the home came up to us and he said, I now know that God has not forgotten me. I now know that God has not forgotten me. Sometimes people ask, how does your short-term people know about the country of Guatemala, or much less this little town here in Tactique, or how is it they came to our home? I love it when they ask that question. Because here's the answer. I tell the people, I say, God has been speaking to some believers over there, far away, people who don't even know you. He's been speaking to them. And to them, He's been saying, go, I want to use you in somebody's life in Guatemala. They are here in response to hearing the voice of the Lord. And they are here to minister in His name, and God has not forgotten you. It makes a huge difference. It's a confirmation of God's love. It also gives us the opportunity to proclaim the gospel. And I know some of our short-term missions team came so unprepared, but the responses of the people often were miraculous and astounding. I remember on one occasion, we went up into a mountain village, way up into a mountain village. It was very difficult to get into. And when we got there, the whole town showed up. Everybody showed up. They had never had a team of North Americans into their community before. I think it's one of the reasons why the Lord said go, and why He said go cross-culturally. Because by going cross-culturally, there's a curiosity that is automatically stirred up. The whole village came. If one of our nationals had gone there, a few people would have come. But a short-term missions team of North Americans were coming, the whole village showed up. The gospel was shared, people came forward for prayer, a door was opened, and before we left, the leaders of the village said, "When will you come back? We need to hear more of this." And I just love that whole component of what short-term missions can do, working cross-culturally. The third thing it does for the national people is it provides the national Christians and the national believers support and encouragement. What does it do for the North Americans? Well, it does lots of things for North Americans. I already touched on what it did for me. There was an awakening, an awareness of the need in the rest of the world, and what I, as a person, could do into meeting that need. It was caused this growth to happen inside of me, seeing the miraculous hand of the Lord, and probably the most startling thing was to be in a ripe harvest field. I had grown up in North America, which is a very unique place right now, and here I was suddenly transported into a ripe harvest field, where the response was instantaneous, and it really was an appetizer for what God wants to do in countries like this. And it develops, in the North Americans, it develops a desire or an interest in long-term missions and a commitment that is ongoing, so that people will go forward in life, especially young people. I love the malleability of young people. They start thinking in terms of their own lives, saying, instead of what will please me, what can I do to serve God? And the long-term investment in those young lives is worth so much more than having a bundle of cash on the ground for the next 6 months. I'd like to read this quote to you. I don't know exactly where I found it, and I'm sorry I can't credit the person who wrote this. But it really fits in terms of touching lives for a worldview that is centered around the gospel and proclaiming the truth of Jesus to a dying world. This is what it says. We have a new wave of younger emerging leaders who passionately desire to live out their Christianity in a secular world. They are willing to play a high-risk game of radically following Jesus, and they are creatively starting new Christian ventures in the name of Jesus. Now is the time to proclaim the gospel. And we have young people in the starting blocks, ready to go. So where does one begin in choosing a missionary organization or a mission or a missionary with which you want to work with a short-term mission? I'm going to give you a list here, and you can find this list. You don't have to be writing down feverishly right now. You can find it in our notes section and have a look at it later and download it. Right now you can just relax and listen. Number one, probably the most important thing is to know what are their core spiritual commitments and values. Do ask for a faith statement. You want to be sure that the organization that you're going to has the same vision and understanding as you do spiritually. Find out if they're a humanitarian organization. Now, there's nothing wrong with humanitarian organizations, but if you're working as a short-term missions group from a church or from a Christian school or some other organization, you want to be sure that the organization or the missionary that is receiving you is indeed proclaiming the gospel. There are lots of good short-term mission opportunities for people who just want to go out and do some good humanitarian work someplace. But that is very different than a short-term mission. A short-term mission has some very real spiritual goals in the receiving community and also in the short-term team members themselves. Ask this missions organization or the missionary questions and find out how they are functioning. What their goals are as a ministry. What's their history record? What's their track record? Ask for a list of others who have led short-term missions or served with them so that you can hear a third-party perspective on how they operate in the country. And if possible, go and check them out personally. Now, I know there's an expense involved in going and checking them out personally. I understand that. And people are very careful with their funds and don't want to spend funds unnecessarily. But if you're going to invest in a short-term missions team, you may want to have a small delegation from your church or from your missions committee come and see what's happening on the ground and check it out before you get involved. We had one organization, they sent their CEO, it was another missions organization, and he came and flew into the country just to have a look at us. This is what he said. There are a lot of organizations that look Christian on their website. I wanted to see if you really are what you say you are. And that's important. You want to find out if this missions organization articulates their purposes and their goals and their objectives in a clear way. Do they know what they're about? Because if they know what they're about and they begin meshing with you and that corresponds with what your church or your missions organization is about, then you've got a win-win situation. And what you want to do is look for an organization where they have their goals and their objectives over here, and you as a church or an organization in North America or as a group, you have your goals here. These are the goals that you want to see accomplished, and you want to look for how much overlap there is. That's what you want to see. And the more overlap, the more likely it is you will have a successful experience. To what type of ministry are they particularly committed? In our case, we're working with evangelism and discipleship and leadership training. And how are we doing this? We're doing this through Christian schools and through distribution of food and medicine. These are the perceived needs. And because these perceived needs bring the people into our ministry, now we have an opportunity to develop relationships and begin working together with them. You want to ask the missionary or the mission organization what kind of care they provide, both prior or during or after their time on the field. How do they handle finances and support raising? And another really important item is, what is their relationship to your church as well as what is their relationship to the national church? Like, do they have good, strong connections and understand what needs to happen with your short-term missions team to enhance both sides of the ministry? This is really important. You can discern a lot about missionaries by evaluating their lifestyles and visiting firsthand and seeing what kind of unwritten rules there are. And those are all important things that will reduce the stumbling blocks that possibly you might have when you go on a short-term missions trip. I'd like to just chat briefly with you about what a team leader's responsibilities are in gearing up for a successful short-term missions trip. The first thing is to begin working with a local church or your missions committee or your local organization and the leadership of the ministry as a whole. This assumes that you're attending a church that has a missions heart and has an understanding of what their involvement in world missions is to be. And this is really important because when the short-term missions trip is over, it's in that environment that the short-term mission team returns. And if this is something that is in the heart of the leadership and the heart of the organization, you're going to find that the long-term effects and benefits begin to spread. That is exactly what our experience was in the Christian school that I was working in. the leadership there understood the value of what a Christian worldview and a gospel-centered vision would mean in the lives of our students. So you might be asked, who is on the missions team? And so when you start begin gathering a short-term missions team, people will say, well, who's going to go? And who, how's this going to work? Who's on the team? I would like you to just change the thinking a little bit. Instead of thinking about who is actually buying a flight ticket, think about who's involved. And I like to say, when a short-term missions team starts preparing, the whole church starts preparing. And when the short-term missions team is on the field, who's involved? The whole church is involved. There are some who pray, there are some who support, and there are some who go. And it is a whole church or a whole ministry experience. If you're leading a team without the blessing of the church leadership, you might have a really good experience where you go. And you might be really touched by the Lord while you're there. And your short-term missions team might become infatuated with what is happening on the mission field and return all excited. But it may be that when you return, that whole disconnect will cause more harm than good. So it's really important to sense the heart of the church, the missions committee, the pastor, and work alongside of them so that when the short-term missions team returns, they have an ambience to step back into and a place of ministry to step back into right away. Your second responsibility as a team leader will be to prepare them spiritually. This is a great opportunity. Your team members are invested. They're taking time to go on this short-term missions trip. They're investing personal finances and funds. They're taking some risks, and they will also be prepared to engage in some study and some reading and developing new disciplines that they wouldn't perhaps be engaging in. And so it's a great time to encourage them to develop a devotional life, prayer time, and ask them to do some reading. And I'll give you at the end of this seminar of reading that you can direct them to that will open up their minds. Preparation to share their testimony. This is a really beautiful opportunity. You can prepare them by having them share their testimony among each other pre-trip. And some interesting things happen. In that process, some people discover they don't really have a testimony, which raises a whole set of new questions and opportunities for you as a team leader, as the mentor to this group, to walk them into a deeper spiritual understanding of who the Lord is and what He's done for them. Because if they're going to articulate it and it falls short, or if it's empty, just reading a few verses, and it has no personal meaning, it isn't alive, you will sense that very quickly, and so will they. And this is a great opportunity to begin dialoguing with them. So prepare them spiritually, prepare them to pray for people. In the mission field, here in Guatemala, when we go into a home, we always end it with a time of prayer. Oftentimes, we gather around the family or the couple or the children that are there, and we say, we would like to just worship the Lord for a moment, and then we're going to pray. And whether they're believers or not, they're open to that. This is what it is being on a mission field that's ripe. It is so exciting. And so they'll say, sure. We ask, can we pray for you? And they'll say, of course you can pray for us. And so we'll worship, take a moment to worship. And the Guatemalan people, the Latin American people, are very sensitive to spiritual things. And while we're worshiping, many times they'll begin crying or responding to the presence of the Lord. He says He dwells in the praises of His people. So in your pre-trip time, you can say, okay, we will be worshiping with small groups of people and then praying for them. So let's begin doing that now. And it's just a great opportunity to take off some of the masks, take off some of our inhibitions, and begin to share with other team members and let the life of Christ come out. Some of your team members may have an opportunity to preach and to be prepared for that. Raise the bar. Stretch them a little. If they're scared or if they say, I'm not really a public speaker or I don't pray out loud, don't let that stop you. As a team leader, you will have the opportunity to prepare the expectations of everybody involved in the short-term missions trip. Well, what will it be like? Prepare them for anything that might be unusual or out of the ordinary or that they're not expecting. What will the beds be like? What will the showers be like? To the best of your ability, prepare them for some of the challenges. Don't go too soft on them. Don't look for the easy way out. For example, here in Guatemala, something that's really, really important is if someone offers you food, you don't deny that food. There's such a shortage of food in this country, and hospitality usually involves offering your guests food, even if it means that you and your children won't eat. So it is a personal sacrifice, but it's also an affront to the person if you reject that food. I just ate, sorry, I don't want that. No. So in our particular situation, in our particular culture, it's really important to prepare them and say there may be times when we're in a home and you're being offered food, you cannot reject the food. And if it doesn't look appetizing, you can't make a face. So you prepare them for that scenario so that you won't build walls between you and the Guatemalan people, you'll take them down. And so you smile and you say, thank you. And then you nibble on it a little bit and say, can I take this home with me? So you prepare the expectations of how it's going to be. Don't go easy on them. Don't give them the opportunity to back out of situations like that and miss an opportunity to deny yourself, but do something positive for the kingdom of God. Something we do on our short-term missions teams, and we ask our leaders to prepare the team members for, is going on a media fast while they're here. Now, many times there is no internet access, but we ask people to turn in all their devices and not to be listening to any music while they're here, not to be engaging in any email or chat or messenger or anything like that. Now, that's a huge step for some people. But that's just one of the requirements we have, and so it becomes a part of the team leader's role to prepare the team members for that so it doesn't come on them as a surprise. I remember on one occasion I had a young person here and they said, I have been listening to music every night when I go to sleep ever since I can remember. If I don't have my music, I will not be able to sleep. And we said, well, you know, your team leader talked with you about this, right? I said, yeah, but I thought you'd make an exception for me. He said, well, do you want to hear from God while you're here on this short-term missions trip? Yeah, I do. Okay, I'm going to ask you to go without your media. And you know what? After you're completely awake for 72 hours, you will eventually get tired. But in that space of time, you're going to begin hearing the Lord like you've never heard Him before. Give some quiet time and wait on Him. And it might feel like an eternity, but if you return to North America having heard the Lord in a new way, wouldn't that be great? Well, this young person begrudgingly agreed, but by the end of the trip, this very same person said, I've decided to go on a media fast one day a week. They weren't going to throw the media away. They weren't going to do something radical, but one day a week they were going to go on a media fast. Don't go easy on them. You might have an opportunity to change their whole spiritual development for years to come. Adjust expectations. What will it be like? Dress code. A big deal here in our part of the world are tattoos and piercings. Well, we have some people, they say, well, if I have tattoos or piercings, can't I come? No, you can come. But we want to take down barriers. It's not this culture adjusting to you because you're the visiting person into this culture, so you need to adjust for them. Don't make hurdles for them, make it difficult for them to understand you. So dress code is a really important thing. Let people know what they might encounter. Let people know what they might encounter with other team members. With young people, I love chatting with young people. Usually on one of the nights I say, how many of you have a bedroom all of your own at home in North America? And most of them put up their hands. Well, here they're going to be sharing a room with 4 or 5 or 6 other people. And after the first day is kind of fun, it's kind of like an adventure, but after that, things start to happen. And some of those conflicts, some of those misunderstandings, some of those inconsiderations are great opportunities to grow and prepare the team, the expectations. This is how your sleeping arrangements might be. And if that happens, we're going to have to start thinking of others and adjusting to others. And it just really gives an opportunity for us to come into a deeper level of fellowship with others. Number 3, as a team leader, you will have an opportunity to help adjust and prepare the team members for perspectives that they will need when they're on the ground. For example, we have a rule when we bring a team, we say we are going to be positive and thankful about everything. Now that's easy to say when you're in North America and things are going well. When you're here in Guatemala and all of a sudden, or out in the field, wherever you are, and all of a sudden circumstances don't go the way you think they should, that's the moment to remember and maintain your perspective. We had one team that arrived here and they had 16 pieces of luggage that were missing. Now, back in those days, we were bringing 2 pieces of luggage each person, and our guideline as a ministry was to bring one package of luggage with clothing to give away, and the other package of luggage were your personal items. These 16 items, these 16 pieces of luggage happened to be all personal items. I just thought, wow, what's the odds of that happening? But that's what happened. And at that moment, the team had the opportunity to stay positive and thankful or to begin complaining. I want you to know that that team rose to the occasion, and we had some amazing, intense times of ministry and spiritual breakthroughs with that team. And they never did get their luggage. We were in the capital city for a number of days, and every day we were running to the airport trying to find out what's happened with the luggage. And the very next day we were going to leave out into the countryside, and I knew that if we didn't pick up the luggage that day, if it didn't come that day, we were going to be here for the rest of our trip without all these personal items that the team needed. And so myself and another person made a trip to the airport, and we came back and we said, we've got some good news and bad news. What would you like first? They said, we would like the good news first, hoping that it was the luggage. I said, well, the good news is everybody gets a change of underwear today. And everybody started cheering. They took that to mean that the luggage arrived. And one guy says, what's the bad news? And I says, well, the bad news is you change with you and you change with you. That joke did not go over very well. However, they maintained a positive attitude through the whole thing, and they were not going to let that interfere. And I think sometimes our North American entitlement gets in the way of our ministry, and this is a great opportunity to set some of those entitlements to the side. Adjust the perspective of the team members to bond with the people. I know in North America we are so task-oriented, and I love the Latin American culture because they are very much relational-oriented, and we had this one team member, he was a great guy. He had a really strong work ethic. I was surprised he came on the team. It was really outside of his comfort zone. And I knew he was a hard worker. He had his own business and he put in many, many hours a day. And he says, I will come if we can work on building a building. I said, well, yeah, you can come. We're going to work on building a building. You can come. But we will be doing other things too, and you'll need to participate in those things as well. And I says, okay, yeah, that's fine, as long as I get to work on building a building. Well, a whole bunch of things happened, and sometimes you have to be flexible and be ready for the unexpected. In this particular case, weather was not with us. There were some delays in getting materials. There were some organizational challenges. The long story is we didn't get to work very much on building a building. And what that meant was our time was filled with children's ministry and ministry in people's homes and hospital visitation and ministry in churches, which was really a stretch for this guy. I was wondering how he was feeling, and one day he came up to me and he said, you know, I thought I was coming to work on building a building, but I realized that the Lord had it all in mind all along, that I would come and build into people's lives and work at building children. And he says, what a joy. As a team leader, you will be able to work with your team members to develop a servant's heart. And we as North Americans, we have a really hard time with this one because we like to be served rather than serve. We like to be takers rather than givers. And just really briefly, I mean, this is kind of obvious, but very briefly, you know that short-term missions has had some unfortunate bad press just in some of the attitudes of team members when they go into a foreign field and what they do while they're there. A giver has an attitude of serving. This is not about me, about what's comfortable for me. It's doing something for others. Servants don't complain. They're relationship-oriented, and they deny themselves. Takers are different. Takers want to step out of anything that is uncomfortable. It becomes an option for them. Takers always are looking for a story or for the photo that they can go and show back home of what the great thing they did. And this is really unfortunate when this happens. And you can do a lot of things to prepare a team member so these things aren't subconsciously brewing underneath some of their motives and actions while they're here. I remember one occasion we were walking through the city dump. And the city dump is just a horrible place. Thousands of people living on the fringes of the city dump and scavenging every day, and children living in the middle of all this filth, and flies everywhere, and the smell's just really horrible. And we were doing some ministry time in the dump, and as we were leaving, I saw this one little child sitting down there, didn't have any pants on, just had some kind of underwear, I'm not sure what, but the shirt that he had on had been a white shirt, but it was just filthy. And he just had filth all over his face, and there were flies sticking to his face. And as I was walking by, my heart broke, and I just thought, wow, this child is really living in difficult circumstances. And then I saw one of our team members see the same child. And when he saw that child, he looked around, he says, here, take my camera. And then he went and grabbed the child, picked up the child, put on a nice smile for the camera, went and put the child down and said, okay, how did the picture turn out? That's a taker. Wasn't thinking about this child, was thinking about his own image. You can do a lot to prepare, and I know that's an extreme. But you can do a lot to prepare people to be givers instead of takers with the servant's heart. I want to just point you in the direction of a book. It's a great book, and I'll list it in the reading material, When Helping Hurts. This is a book that is just a famous book by Corbett and Fickert, and if you haven't heard of it, you need to get a copy. This is probably the best thing you can read as a short-term missions team leader in preparing for your experience. Now, I will tell you right out, this is not very pro short-term missions, because it points out all the things that can go wrong and do go wrong with many short-term missions teams. I have a little handout here, and this is available in my reference list at the end. It's a one-page summary. It's a little bit dog-eared here because I use it quite a bit. It's a one-page summary of what's in this book. And this book basically talks about poverty. And poverty will be one of the things that your short-term missions teams likely will encounter. Injustice would be another one. Violence might be another one. All of these things are addressed in this book in a really neat way. And I love their definition of poverty. Poverty is broken relationships and the effects of broken relationships. Resource poverty, we as North Americans, we're very much tied into the monetary system and our wealth and our riches and money. This book redefines poverty, saying it is broken relationships and the results of broken relationships. And of course, our relationship with God is the beginning of all healing. So this book also goes on to explain that there are 3 responses that we as missionaries should have. And this is helpful for a short-term missionary to understand that there's relief, rehabilitation, and development. Our ministry is primarily involved in development. However, we just had some hurricanes come through the country, and so for a period of time we moved into relief. Also, the COVID crisis provoked a whole lot of issues, and we were able to move into relief. But this book does such a great job of defining those things and helping us to avoid some of the common mistakes. This book will give you some real good insights on how to work with the nationals without hurting them. I love the principles that are in this book. We had been discovering many of these principles for years. The book came out, articulated it so well. It's been out for quite a while already. Let's talk for a moment about cross-cultural ministry and some of the factors that are involved in cross-cultural ministry. Many components of culture are neither right nor wrong. They're just different. When we come from our North American perspective, oftentimes we think we have the right way, and other people haven't caught on to that yet. But that's just simply not the case. It's not right or wrong, it's just different. And behaviors and social systems and cultural values and worldviews all vary depending on location and the people you're with. Now, I understand the Bible has a biblical worldview that is universal. And when something is in violation of that biblical worldview, then we as missionaries are called upon to begin expressing that and teaching biblical principles. And that's part of our mission statement, is to teach biblical principles in such a way that it will bring about spiritual change in the individual, in their families, and then in their communities. But we can't confuse culture that is neither good nor bad. So let's talk about some of the inevitable reactions that happen when we go into cross-cultural ministry. And so I would ask you, do you know the signs of culture shock? Okay, you might think, well, yeah, but it's just such a short time, it's just 2 weeks. No, you can experience culture shock in 2 weeks. And I know culture shock happens in different levels. When we moved here, it started, the first couple of weeks, there was a certain feel, and then 3 months we crossed another hurdle, and 6 months we crossed another hurdle. When our passports were all stolen and we couldn't leave the country if we wanted to, all of a sudden we crossed another hurdle, and culture shock kind of comes in a progressive manner. And what will happen in the 2 weeks that you're here? Well, you will experience it. The effects of culture shock, the signs of culture shock are frustration, confusion, tension, and embarrassment. When any of those things start surfacing, you know you're beginning to experience a little bit of culture shock. Now, I have a diagram that I'm going to share with you, and I wish I could credit this diagram. I believe it came from the Nazarene University, but I've lost my connection to it, and I'll look for it, hopefully put it in your notes at the end. But these signs of culture shock, frustration, confusion, tension, and embarrassment, they happen to us all. And it's your job as a short-term missions team leader to prepare people for this. And what happens, your initial attitude before you come really has an effect on how you will react to these things. So, for example, if you have an initial attitude of suspicion, fear, or prejudice, whether it's known or unknown or realized in yourself, you will respond to the circumstances very differently. You will begin criticizing, rationalizing, withdrawing, jumping to conclusions. And if I see anything that happens very frequently with short-term missions teams is people jumping to conclusions. All kinds of things. And I'm just looking at it and saying, no, you're misunderstanding this completely. I was guilty of this on my very first short-term missions trip. I came here from my North American perspective and had some ideas, and we went into this little remote community way down this road. We were off the power grid it was a very dry area of the country, very dusty, very hot. And when we got to this site where this pastor was planting a church, a national pastor was planting a church, I was walking around, and the first thing I noticed was his children were filthy. And I was just looking around, and I just got a bad feeling right away. I just thought, well, the least you could do is keep your kids clean. The clothing were filthy, their hands were dirty, their faces were dirty, and I jumped to a conclusion. that they were parents that didn't really care for their kids and weren't doing things that a good parent should do. We had an opportunity to work on some construction there for a while, and that evening after supper, we listened to the pastor tell his story. And he started talking about the sacrifices he and his family had made to come there. And one of the sacrifices was that in this particular piece of property that they were allowed to settle in and begin this church development, there were no other believers in the area. There was no water. They had no access to water. And he got really quiet and he said, the closest well is a 1/4 mile away. And I don't know whether it's because there isn't water in the well and they need it for themselves, or whether they don't like us because we're sharing the gospel. But there are times when they won't let us get that water and we have to walk another 1/4 mile to get water and carry it back. I just felt so convicted. I just felt I had been jumping to these conclusions and they were completely wrong. So an initial attitude of suspicion, fear, or prejudice will affect, it will lead you to, these incorrect responses and lead to isolation and alienation from the people. On the other hand, if you start with an attitude of openness, acceptance, and trust, and now you encounter a cultural clash or something you don't understand, a difference, and you start feeling some frustration, some confusion, some tension, you have a different choice, and you make the choice of observing, listening, and inquiring. And what that does is it builds rapport and understanding, and the walls come down, and now you have an opportunity to share the gospel. This is really beautiful. The last thing I want to speak to you about is reentry. And reentry, there's been whole books written about reentry. And you might think, well, what exactly is reentry? Most short-term missions teams prepare their team reasonably well to go into the field and begin ministering, experiencing the culture and all those things. But many times, and I made the same mistake, I wasn't preparing my team adequately for returning back to North America. And you might say, well, what do you have to do to return to North America? I mean, this is where you've lived all your life. You shouldn't have to really do any training for that. But when you go on a 2-week short-term missions trip, you will experience some reverse culture shock. And there's been whole books written on this. You might want to read up on it a bit, and I will give you some references as well. So they're going to be stepping outside of their own culture, seeing a new culture, and then evaluating their own culture in light of the experience that they've had. And this can be so positive and bring so many beautiful things back into your church community, back into the lives of your team members. It is exciting to see when that's managed well. Now, having said all of that, I love what happens on short-term missions trips. And we have received some 400 short-term missions teams over the years, and this last year we've been without. We're looking forward to when teams will come our way again. And I want to encourage you to consider your role in this. And if this feels a little bit overwhelming, remember the story I told you at the beginning? I had never been on a short-term missions trip. I was as green could be. My team really was not prepared well, and yet eternal results came out of that trip. Lives were changed here in Guatemala, and lives were changed in those team members. Right now, just this last week, I heard a story of a former team member. He is now going to be working in Dominican Republic with Missionary Aviation Fellowship. There are former team members serving in Europe, in Africa, in South America, former short-term mission team members who have dedicated their lives to unreached people groups at great personal risk, going into countries that are not yet ripe, but they're going in and praying. And this is just so exciting. We live in such an exciting age, such an exciting day. All of us need to be engaged, and we're going to push through to the end. God bless you. Thank you so much for your time with me today, and I certainly do look forward to hearing from you. If I don't have a chance to answer your questions at the end of the talk today, by all means, do write me, and I'll be happy to engage with you. God bless you.